My name is Claire Grandison. I'm an attorney at Community Legal Services. We're based in Philadelphia. And I'm here with my co-presenter, Tobar, also an attorney at Community Legal Services. You'll be hearing from both of us this morning. So I just wanted to take a minute to tell you what Community Legal Services, or CLS, does. We provide free civil legal services to low-income residents of Philadelphia. And we engage in high-level advocacy to try to change systems. And what that means is we do all kinds of work, like landlord-tenant, we prevent evictions, we represent people in foreclosures, we represent people in a lot of appeals for public benefits, like SSI benefits, what we're talking about today. We work on some family law, all kinds of non-criminal issues where people need a lawyer. And we only represent people in Philadelphia, but there are legal services providers all across the state that do this work. So if you're facing one of those issues and you don't live in Philadelphia, there are other resources that are available to you with your local legal services organizations. So to start us off today, I wanted to just briefly go over our agenda. We're here today to talk about SSI benefits, which stands for Supplemental Security Income benefits. It's a type of disability benefit through the Social Security Administration. We are going to start just by doing a quick overview of SSI to make sure we're all on the same page about what the eligibility criteria are. From there, we're going to go through some of the processes that people have to go through to keep and get benefits, which are usually cutoff decisions or new applications, what those processes look like. And then we'll go through some practical tips for you or for other people that you work with to access SSI benefits or keep their SSI benefits. And then at the end, we'll go through some common issues that come up once people are getting SSI benefits. That's not the end of the road. People have all kinds of questions about, can I work? What happens when I get an overpayment? Why are my benefits being reduced? So we'll look at some of those common issues that come up once, hopefully, the SSI benefits are in place. Now, we're all here, we're focused on the transition to adulthood at this conference, so we wanted to start out just by showing you all a video, fingers crossed that it works, that we made a few years ago at Community Legal Services that summarizes some of the tips we're going to be talking about for the transition to adulthood for SSI recipients.
When you turn 18, your SSI benefits can be cut off. If you receive a letter informing you that your benefits will be cut off, appeal immediately. If you respond within 10 days saying you disagree with the decision, you can receive benefits at least until you have a hearing date. More than half of people lose their SSI when they turn 18. Here are some steps you should take before you turn 18. Visit your doctor and therapist regularly. Having documents from your doctors, therapists, and school can better your case. Before turning 18, you should ask your school for information about vocational rehabilitation programs. Vocational rehabilitation programs can help you get training and find job leads. Applying for vocational rehabilitation services can help you keep your SSI benefits. Most people wait at least a year for a hearing. Being prepared can make all the difference. The key to keeping your benefits is going to doctors and therapist appointments regularly. Saving documents from doctors and school, and joining vocational rehabilitation or job training programs.
Text is pretty small at the end. What this video is explaining is just that there are several layers of appeal, and that it's important to keep the Social Security Administration updated at every stage of the appeal. And we created that video with one of our former clients. And so we're going to be reviewing a lot of those tips that are in the video. We'll go over in a little bit more detail today, the importance of going to see doctors, of connecting with vocational rehabilitation services. Sometimes I also appear as doctor in videos, so it's so fun showing that to people. I want to just jump in now to our quick introduction to SSI benefits. But before we go through this whole presentation, it would be really helpful to know how all of you are engaged in this SSI work, whether it's supporting a family member to go through the process, whether it's your job to help people in SSI appeals. So could we just do a quick raise of hands? Who is helping a family member, friend, or themselves access SSI benefits? Fantastic. That is awesome. So important. And whose job is it to help people with their SSI application in some way? And what about, does anybody help SSI recipients if they're going through an appeals process? Cool. Okay. And does anybody know somebody who's getting SSI benefits right now? All right. So for those of you who know people are getting SSI benefits, what are SSI benefits for? What do they help people pay for? And you can just shout it out and I'll repeat it back so we don't have to walk around with the mic. Housing. Anything else? Food. Medical benefits, absolutely. Anything else? Housing, food, medical needs. What was that? Childcare, absolutely. So the good news about SSI benefits are that they help people meet their basic needs. They cover food, shelter, clothing, transportation to doctors, to school, really whatever that person needs to stabilize their lives. It also provides access to health insurance. So they are an essential source of support. So anything that you do to help the people in your life or the people that you work with connect with SSI benefits can be really transformative for them. And so it's very important work. So moving on to what SSI benefits are, this is a federal needs-based program, which means it exists all across the country. And part of what they're looking at when deciding who's eligible for it is needs-based, which means that the person has to have a lower income and resources. Resources are just things that they own or money they have saved in the bank. SSI provides cash income to older adults who are 65 or older, adults with serious and long-term disabilities, or children with severe and marked impairments. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about all of those words. The benefit amount usually changes every year. So as of 2019, the maximum that an individual can get is $771. If there's a married couple living together, they actually reduce the benefit amount for each of those people so that for the couple as a whole gets $1,157. That's per month, yes. There's also a state supplement, which is also monthly. So the state of Pennsylvania throws in an extra $22.10 for individuals and $33.30 for couples, and that comes from the welfare office. And recipients automatically get Medicaid as well. And I just want to take a minute to explain sort of the scope of what we're talking about today. So the Social Security Administration is huge. They administer a lot of different kinds of benefits, and we could stay here all day talking about them. We are focusing on SSI benefits today, which the primary criteria are age, you have to be 65 or older, or a disability. But Social Security also administers retirement benefits, which hopefully a lot of us will still be able to access someday. Disability benefits for people who have a more extensive work history. Survivor's benefits, or disabled adult child benefits. And I bring this up just because some of the rules are different. The definition of disability is the same for both programs, but some of the work rules, some of the financial eligibility rules are different. So before you talk to anybody about benefits, it's really important to know what kind of benefit are you talking about. And today we're going through the rules about SSI benefits. All right, so like I said, these are the main eligibility factors for SSI benefits. Social Security looks at your income, your resources, how much you have saved, whether or not you have a disability. And then there are other factors like immigration status, whether you're incarcerated or living in a public institution, that are a little bit more nuanced and not as common, so we won't go through all those details today. All right, so starting out with the income rules for children, the important thing to know about this is that for children under the age of 18, the income of their parents or guardians that they live with is deemed to them, which means that part of the income is counted as income towards the child. And it is an incredibly complicated formula that I will not bore you with, but I wanted to give you just a general sense of what's the ballpark that we're looking at. So this is a chart that you can access on Social Security's website. And just to give you an example of how this chart is read, because it's kind of confusing. There's one side on your left here for earned income, and on the right is unearned income. So say, for example, we have a household with one parent who is working and one child, and the parent is applying for benefits for that child. We're going to look at that top left corner, and as long as the parent is earning less than $3,125 a month, that child would be eligible for some amount of benefits. That is pre-tax, yes. As the parent's income goes up or down, the child's benefit amount will be adjusted based on the parent's income. And this is just to give you like a general sense of the income rules. It's always going to be case specific. So don't take this as like a clear-cut guideline. There's a lot of nuance to this, but I just wanted to give you guys a general sense. For adults, there are a few different ways to think about income. When you apply for SSI benefits, the first thing that Social Security does is look at whether or not your income makes you ineligible. They don't even get to the disability question. For adults, if you're earning $1,220 a month at the time you apply, you are not eligible for benefits. That is also an amount that changes every year. This is the number for 2019. People get confused by that because they think that means once you're getting benefits, you can't earn more than that every month, but that's not true. This is only at the time you apply. What we're going to talk about at the end of the presentation is once you are found eligible as an SSI recipient, there's not a specific cap on how much you can work. So just note that this number is only at the time of the application that it can make you ineligible. The resource limit is separate from income. So first they look at income, all of the money coming to you, or if you're a child, to your parents or guardians every month. Next they look at how much you have in resources. And like I said, resources, that includes money in the bank or things that you own other than the family home that you live in, the family car that you use, and there are a few other exceptions to that. But in general, for most people, it's like the money that you have in the bank. And the resource limit varies depending on the household composition. For an individual adult, for like an 18-year-old who's applying for SSI benefits for themselves, the resource limit is $2,000. For a married couple, it's $3,000. And then for children, it's a little bit higher, depending on if it's a one-parent household, it would be $4,000, or a two-parent household, it's $5,000. This is a very low number. This number has not been adjusted for decades. It is very, very hard for people who are getting SSI benefits not to be able to save for expenses, big expenses that might come up. So I encourage you, if you're working with people, to talk to them about alternatives, like if anybody's familiar with the Pennsylvania ABLE Act, they can save money in an ABLE account and it can be excluded from this resource limit. You can set up a special needs trust. There are ways that you can set up funds to be excluded from this resource limit, but just if you've got money in the bank account and you're an individual, you can't save more than $2,000. So I want to give you a quick sense of what kind of disabilities can make people eligible for SSI benefits. We're going to look at this for children and for adults because it's two different definitions. So Social Security's definition for children has three parts. I've written up the definition here if you want to read it. The first part is that you have to have a medically determinable impairment, which means that you must have a diagnosis from a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. The next requirement is that it must cause marked and severe functional limitations, which means it has to be serious. And it has to have some impact on your ability to do things. And finally, it has to be expected to last 12 months or more or result in death. That doesn't mean that when you go file your application, it already has to have lasted for 12 months. It means like if you broke your arm and it's gonna get better in a couple of months, that doesn't satisfy this requirement. It needs to be something that is longer term. Yeah, do you have a question?
I do. So a lot of the people that I represent and work with have specific learning disabilities, and that can be those can be pretty severe, but they aren't necessarily determined by a doctor. Maybe it's the school that determine that, and so I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so the question is if you're working with a child who's been diagnosed with a specific learning disability, whether or not, and they're diagnosed by the school, whether or not that would satisfy this requirement. So typically, the school is performing some kind of evaluation that's conducted generally by a psychologist, and a psychologist would satisfy that requirement. If it's not a psychologist, we would have to look back. Have you seen that be an issue where it's not generally a certified psychologist?
No,
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So then we're good. Psychologists also satisfy that requirement. How does Social Security actually implement this definition of disability? For children, it's usually a two-part process. The first is they look at whether or not the child meets a listing, and I'm going to tell you what that is in just a minute. The second is, okay, even if they don't meet a listing, do they what's called functionally equal a listing? And we'll go through both of those steps. So the first is whether or not they meet a listing. This is basically just like a list of diagnoses that Social Security has put together. It's broken down by body system, and if you're working with someone you want to see if they meet a listing, you can go look at the rules for that specific diagnosis. And I've got a couple of examples here so we can talk about what that means. So say, for example, you're helping someone who has asthma, and they want to know if they're eligible for SSI benefits. Well, the bad news is Social Security changed this in the past couple of years, and it's a lot harder to be eligible for asthma than it used to be. The person, in order to meet a listing, needs to have 3 hospitalizations that are 48 hours or more during a 12-month period. Anybody who knows anybody with asthma knows that's longer than most people spend in the hospital. So most people will not be meeting this asthma listing. So the good news is that doesn't necessarily mean they're not eligible. It just means you have to move on to the second step, that they don't meet the asthma listing. But maybe you get lucky, or I don't think lucky is the right word, but maybe that person unfortunately did have 3 hospitalizations that were 48 hours or longer. That's where the analysis ends. They just meet Social Security's definition of what it means to have a disability, and you don't have to go to the next step. Another example would be juvenile rheumatoid arthritis requiring the use of a wheelchair or walker. Another example would be epilepsy that causes generalized tonic-clonic seizures at least once a month for 3 months in a row while the person is taking medication. Again, like that one's a tough one. A lot of people, thankfully, their epilepsy is better controlled with medication now than it used to be several years ago. So if you're working with that person and they don't meet the listing, you move on to the second step. The second step, if someone does not meet a listing, is to look at whether they functionally equal it. And in this analysis, Social Security is looking at 6 key areas of functioning. I know this is a lot of detail, but I actually think this is pretty important because if you are helping someone with an application or an appeal, it's helpful to know what are the key areas that Social Security is looking at so you can help highlight challenges in those areas. And these are very similar to the key areas they're looking at for young adults, so a lot of this will carry over. So the first area is acquiring and using information. This can be someone who has a learning disability and is functioning a couple grade levels behind in school. But it could also be someone with sickle cell who's been sick a lot, who's had to go to the doctor a lot, who's had to go to the hospital, and they've missed a lot of days of school, so they're lagging, they're a little bit behind. It can be caused by any diagnosis. The next area is attending and completing tasks. So this is any challenges with focusing, like because of ADHD, or difficulties completing a task from start to finish without supervision or extra support. Next would be interacting and relating with others. This is any difficulty getting along with other people or forming relationships. So it could be caused by a speech and language impairment, or it could be caused by intermittent explosive disorder, aggressive outbursts, or social withdrawal, just not being comfortable around other people, having social anxiety. The next is moving about and manipulating objects. So anybody who's getting occupational therapy might have limitations in this domain. It looks at fine and gross motor delays. Then we have caring for oneself, which is very broad. It covers everything from emotional regulation, if a child is having a lot of tantrums, to daily tasks, needing help completing daily tasks like buying groceries or getting ready in the morning. Health and physical well-being is really about needing to see the doctor a lot, needing to go to the hospital a lot, having a really intensive treatment that requires a lot of supervision, support, or just intensive treatment. And in order to be found disabled under this analysis, you need to have marked limitations in 2 or extreme limitations in 1. And that just means serious or even more serious. But just for those who know about standardized testing, marked is 2 standard deviations below the mean. So if someone had an IQ score of 70, that is 2 standard deviations below the mean of 100, that would be a marked limitation. And extreme is 3 standard deviations below the mean. So if they had an IQ score of 55. You don't need standardized testing. I just think that's a useful benchmark to give you a sense of like how serious is serious. Now, like I said, the definition for disability changes once the person turns 18, which is the point when Social Security has decided someone is adult. And the definition here has a lot of similarities. You still need a medically determinable impairment. You still need a medical diagnosis. And you still have that durational requirement. It has to last for 12 months or be expected to result in death. But then the other difference is now we're looking at whether or not the effects of those impairments make it impossible for the person to engage in substantial gainful activity. That just means their disability makes it impossible for them to work full-time without accommodations or support. So if someone can work with a job coach, if someone can work with extra breaks, they could still be disabled under Social Security's definition. They're looking at how the person functions without support or accommodations, and whether or not they have limitations that prevent them from working on a sustained basis, 40 hours every week, day after day. And they implement this definition also in more or less a 2-part process. The first is they look at the listings like we just talked about. That's that list of diagnoses. Most of them are very similar for adults. Some of them, like low birth weight, could really only apply for children. But a lot of them, like ADHD, exists for children and adults. Depression, intellectual disability. It's basically the same definition for kids and adults. So if you met the listing as a kid, you probably meet it as an adult as well. The difference is that second part step. If you don't meet a listing, they're looking at whether or not you can work full-time. So they put together what's called a residual functional capacity assessment. This is supposed to put together all of your limitations. I gave you some examples here of what kinds of factors they're looking at, but they're looking at physical limitations and mental limitations. So for physical, they're saying, okay, do you have limitations in the ability to walk, sit, stand, lift, carry, bend, push, pull? For mental, they're looking at, can you understand, remember, and apply instructions that your employer gives to you? Again, without accommodations. Can you follow instructions? Can you respond appropriately when your supervisor gives you feedback or criticism about how to do the job better? Can you stay focused well enough to complete tasks from start to finish? And so they put together a list of all of your limitations, and then they decide if, given all those limitations, you can still work or not. It's a very weird process, I'm not going to lie to you. You might get a decision from Social Security saying that the person you're working with can do a very bizarre job like lens inserter, nut sorter. It's like jobs that no one's ever heard of, but they're not looking at whether or not that job actually exists, unfortunately. They're just looking at your ability to work. So we're going to move on to some of the discussion about the process, how the appeal and the application process work. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions about the definition of disability? Yeah, go ahead.
So the limitations are determined by, question
Yeah, great question. So what are the limitations determined by? We'll get into a little bit more detail about it, but the quick answer is just they look at all of the evidence that Social Security has. And so what Social Security does when they're deciding your eligibility is they get your permission to request records from your school, from your doctor. If you are saying that you have some disability that you're not currently seeing a doctor for, they can send you for an evaluation with some of their consultants, which is not ideal. They're very short evaluations. And they send a function form to you, so you get to give them, you as the applicant. And they can also send it to a third party who knows you well. Like if it was a parent or a young adult, they could send it to a child or a young adult, they could send it to a parent to complete. And then they look at all of that evidence together, and then the adjudicator or the judge, depending on what stage it's at, decides which evidence is the most compelling, which evidence is the most consistent, and the adjudicator, the decision maker, is the one pulling it together from all the evidence. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a provider, and I just had one of my clients who I've done a work-based learning experience with ask me to write her a letter to Social Security, basically showing them like how she did and what her limitations were throughout us working with her. And so sometimes I'll ask for vocational records if there are any from providers, so that I can help, prove why she should receive Social Security.
That's so helpful. So as a provider of vocational services, she was asked for input about what the person's limitations are after an assessment, so that person, the applicant, could show it to the Social Security Administration to explain what their limitations are in the work context. And I can't emphasize enough how valuable that is. That is the kind of evidence that Social Security needs. And if someone has done an assessment with you, or if you are a provider in some way, that is the kind of evidence that gives Social Security not just a guess about what the person's limitations are, but no, I've worked with them and I've seen them, and this is where they would need support. This is where they would have a challenge in the work environment. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, go ahead.
Students that are turning 18 and still remaining in school at 21, do they still have to reapply at 18?
So the question is, students who remain in school until 21, do they have to reapply? If it's okay, I'm going to put that on pause because we're about to talk about that. But the answer is no. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll move on, but we'll have more time for questions. It's just the side arrow. Yeah. Okay.
All right, hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about redeterminations and CDRs, which are continuing disability reviews. So at age 18, generally there's a redetermination that happens, and you're going from the child standard that we were talking about to the adult standard. Unfortunately, at this time is when a lot of people are taken off the rolls. Something like 75% in Pennsylvania are taken off the rolls at that time. But redetermined, so even if you're, let's say, taken off the rolls or determined to not be disabled at this redetermination process, there are other options of continuing to receive the SSI benefit, right? So one of those Claire kind of mentioned earlier on in the slides, and that was Section 301, right? So under Section 301, if, let's say, a month before you turned 18, you were receiving vocational rehabilitation services and you had an IEP, you may still qualify for SSI disability benefits until you're age 21. So that's one way you can still receive those benefits even if you were determined as being disabled under the new standard. You also can appeal during this time. So aside from the redetermination, there are also continuing disability reviews. So age 18 is not the only time that Social Security is looking to see if you're still eligible for benefits. They can look to see if your disability or impairment has improved at any time. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that's the CDR, the continuing disability reviews also. So that's what I was saying earlier. If a youth is found as not disabled as an adult, they can also appeal, right? So not only can you, you can do these two things at the same time. You can say that you still qualify under the Section 301, and you also file for an appeal. And the appeal, you have 65 days after that determination to file for that appeal. Yes.
Is this where from the video, the 10 days comes into play?
So the 10 days comes into play is if you want to keep your benefits during that appeal time. And I'm going to discuss that more later in the things. No worries. Anyone have any other questions with regards to what I said?
So when you say similar program, does that include like school, staying in school through age 21?
Yes. Anyone else?
Can you repeat what he said so they can get it?
So the question was, with regards to similar programs, does that include school, staying in school? And the answer is yes. Thank you. So we're just going to talk about some of the procedural steps. So if you get a letter, again, saying that you've been denied benefits, or your benefits are getting cut off, I should say, because those are two separate things, you have 65 days to file an appeal. And this relates to the age 18 redetermination and CDRs. You have 15 days to file an appeal to continue to receive your benefits during this time. This is very important because the process for the appeal lasts for a very long time. In the past, it's lasted for around 2 years, right? So it's really important for those because this is such a vital income resource. It's really important if you can still receive those benefits while you wait on that appeal hearing. That's the best case scenario. This says 15 days. Technically, it's 10 days. The standard is 10 days, but then there's 5 mailing days. Okay. So a lot of youth will newly become eligible for SSI benefits because, as Claire was talking about earlier, generally, when you're 17 and under, you have to go by the parent's income. But when you turn 18, it goes by your income and your resource level. So a lot of young people will be newly filing applications at this time. To file an application, just go to your local Social Security office. We'll talk about later. We'll actually show a link later in the slides as to where you can find like a locator to find your local Social Security office. You can also call the number that is listed there. You can also file online. Some people can file online. There are exceptions to that. Any questions with regards to that? Go.
As far as when a youth turns 18 and not using the parent income, does that include kids that stay in high school?
Yes.
They're still getting it to 21 because they have the IUP or whatnot. From those 3 years, they will not count the parent's income?
Yes, that's correct. So the question is with regards to young people who are still in high school, but who've turned 18 and they're in high school into 21, are you still only using the child's income or the young person's income and not the parent's income? And the answer is yes. No problem.
And then kind of piggybacking off of that, does that same happen with the resource limits? So for example, if the parents have, $3,000 in the bank or whatever in their name, that's no longer counted because the money's not in the name of the student who's applying, correct?
So with regards to, so the question was with regard to the resource limit, if the parent have a certain amount of resource limits that's attached to their name, is it no longer applied to the young person? And yes, so the answer is yes, it's no longer applied to the young person. The new resource limit would be $2,000 for the young person based on an individual level. Any other questions?
So I just want to, so if under 18 you get SSI, over 18 you get SSDI, or is it the other way around?
Under 18, you get, there are two different programs. Those are two different, so the question was, under 18, you get SSI, over 18, you get SSDI. And the answer is, those are two different separate programs. Under 18, you get SSI based on a child standard. Over 18, you get SSI based on the adult standard.
Right, and you can get the adult standard if you apply over 18 to 21 if you're still in school.
Yes.
But you have the.
So the question was, sorry, I just want to repeat the question. So the adults, you still would receive the SSI for the adult standard if you apply after 18 and you're still in school. And the answer is yes.
So when you age out at 21, is that happening next? Am I ahead of schedule?
Go ahead. Sorry.
So the 18 to 21, I just want to make sure that we're clear. That's a work incentive that Social Security has put in place. So you can get benefits from 18 to 21 if you have an IEP in school, but only if you were receiving SSI benefits as a child. This is a way for your benefits to continue, to not get cut off at age 18 if you are in an appropriate program, because Social Security wants you to have sufficient income to complete that program. If you are not getting benefits below age 18, you cannot just get benefits from 18 to 21 because you're in an IEP program. You have to have already been receiving benefits, already have been enrolled in an IEP or a vocational rehabilitation or a similar program, and then the benefits continue until you complete that program. After age 21, the benefits can continue after 21 if you continue to participate in an appropriate program. So IEP is automatic. Social Security just said, we know if you've got an IEP and you're in school, that's a program we approve of. After age 21, they have to do a more detailed analysis of whether or not they think you're getting some kind of skill that's going to make it less likely that you need benefits in the future. But usually vocational rehabilitation programs satisfy that. But again, it's only for people who were already getting SSI benefits and were facing a cutoff decision. And in order for it to continue past age 21, there can only be a 3-month gap between the programs. So say, for example, they're getting SSI benefits as a child, they have an IEP in school, they stay in school until age 21, and they make the brilliant decision to apply for OVR services 2 years before they finish high school, so that by the time their IEP expires, they already have an individualized plan for employment with OVR in place. They transition from one plan to the next plan in there's less than a 3-month gap between the two plans. Those benefits could potentially continue for as long as that person is in the OVR program. Now, I know we're all, or at least I shouldn't project on you, I'm worried about some of the delays with the closed order of selection with OVR. So it's going to be more and more important for people to apply early in school, because Social Security doesn't care if that gap is longer than 3 months because you're on a waiting list. They want to see a plan in place. And this is just a backup. So the first choice is obviously just to be found eligible for benefits because you have a qualifying disability. This is like a backup work incentive. It's not, to be perfectly frank, it's not that common, but I like to make a pitch about it because while I have you all in the room, I want people to be aware of how important it is to have this continuity of plans. Because not only is it important for planning for the young person, it's also important because it has implications for their financial stability. Did that answer the 21 after question?
Yeah.
Okay, and just to...
It is so hard, because it is so unique to every young adult.
Yeah, it is so hard because it's so unique to every young adult. That's absolutely true. And just to distinguish a little bit more between like the SSI as a kid, SSDI as an adult. SSDI is based on your work history or the work history of your parents if your parents are deceased, disabled, or retired. So some people might experience the transition between those two programs if their parents have an extensive work history and they start collecting Social Security benefits themselves. But other than that, most people just continue with the type of benefits that they're found eligible for.
What happens if an individual is deemed inappropriate for work before they reach 21?
If an individual is deemed inappropriate for work before they turn 21 by OVR, then they would not be, if OVR is not providing services, then they could not access this work incentive. But if they were deemed inappropriate for work by OVR, that would be very compelling evidence that they remain disabled under the Social Security standard. So the hope would be they would just be found disabled as an adult. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the clarification, Claire. So this very confusing table is basically just stating where you should go within the stages of the process, who you should be interacting with, and what are like the deadlines that are attached to the different stages of the process. So we're all going to just take a second to look at that again. Yeah. But I think you all received this electronically, so you can look at it at another time. So now we're going to talk about reconsideration. And we're going to keep on hampering reconsideration today because it's a newer step as of April 20th, actually. And so basically, this just makes the process longer for those who are new applications, right? It only applies to those who are doing new applications. So with this step, generally it's you apply, you're denied, you get a hearing, you wait forever to get a hearing, you get the hearing, you wait, you get an answer. You apply again if you're denied, and so on and so forth. Well, this step adds the new step before you actually get to a hearing. So you apply, you're denied, you appeal. This is the reconsideration portion. You appeal, there is no face-to-face hearing. This process actually takes 100 days. 100 days to get a decision with this, so you're extending this time by 100 days. And then you get your decision. If you're not found to be eligible at that time, which more than likely you're not going to be found because only 15% of people are found at that time, then you appeal again, and then you get your face-to-face hearing maybe a year or so later. But then if you're found at the hearing to not be eligible, then you can also appeal again. Is that correct? Thank you. And so you, again, with your appeals, you have 65 days to file your appeal after the decision. Any questions with regard to that?
So if you apply, and so you're waiting all of this time, is there retroactive? So, I mean, if you're going through all of these denial appeal, is there money that would come to you if you were deemed?
So the question is, if you apply and you're going through this appeal process and it's taking an extended amount of time, is it retroactive, the money that you can receive if you're finally found to meet the criteria? And the answer is yes. You can get back pay as to regard to your initial application date.
Wouldn't that put you over the income limit if it's long enough?
No. Depending. So the question was, wouldn't that put you over the income limit if it's long enough? So I'll just use an example that I just had where I was able to get a client something between $20,000 to $30,000 in back payment. And so the benefits will come in 3 stages, and each time you have 9 months to spend that money. So if you spend that money each time in those 9 months allotted, then it doesn't count as to your resource limit. Or put it in your ABLE account that we discussed earlier today, or mentioned earlier today. Any other questions?
So wait, can we look at this from the reverse perspective? If you appeal within the 15-day time limit and you continue to receive benefits throughout this process, but then ultimately you're found not eligible.
We're actually going to mention that. So the question was, if you appeal and unfortunately, you're found not eligible through all the appeal process, and you were receiving benefits throughout the time, will you have to pay that money back? And so the answer is possibly. All right. So what you're discussing is actually called an overpayment. So if you were receiving those benefits during that time and you're found to not be eligible for the benefit, would you have to pay the money back? Social Security could dock you for an overpayment, but those overpayments can be waived. That's why it's really important also to try to connect with an advocate who kind of knows how to deal with these things, because we get overpayments waived all the time. Some of the time. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So now we're going to talk about tips for applications and for appeals. So one of the first tip is start and continue receiving treatment. This is very, very, very important, because the Social Security office is not, or the judge is not going by your word as to your diagnoses, as to how it affects your daily life. Actually, they're generally looking at like doctor's notes and the records that Claire was talking about earlier to determine these things. So it's really important to start and to continue receiving treatment for each and every diagnosis, for each and every issue or impairment you say that you have. Communicate substantial changes in treatment and address or health and authorize. So like if you change your treatment, if you change your doctor, if you move, it's really important to communicate that to Social Security, because you may be receiving notices, you may be receiving all types of things that would actually hinder your ability to continue receiving SSI benefits if you miss certain timelines. So it's really important to tell them of any big changes. Be detailed about your symptoms on your very worst day. So I am an attorney in the Youth Justice Project at Community Legal Services, and this one is really, really important, because I handle most age 18 redetermination, or I handle age 18 redeterminations in young people's cases. And unfortunately, Social Security is not thinking about like strengths-based understanding of things. They're thinking about, how does your impairment affect you on your worst day? And it's really important. It's really important to get the young person to understand that, because throughout our other parts of dealing with the young person, we are talking more about like the strengths base, what you are able to do. And it could be kind of very disheartening for a young person to hear you hamper on and on about like their impairments and what they are not able to do. But it's really important, because the Social Security office or the judge wants to hear how this functionally affects them on their day-to-day basis. The last one would be submit copies of evidence when possible. There's an underline of copies, because while I love Social Security, they lose documents. So please do not give them your original. Give them copies, make copies of your original for yourself, because it is very likely that you will be submitting those copies again. And again, yes. Evidence of disability, Claire was talking about this earlier. Medical evidence includes medication history, hospitalizations, also behavioral diagnoses, again, those doctor's notes, those treatment notes, what they're going by or what they're looking at. School, vocational training evidence, IEPs, 504s. Disciplinary records would go to those functional assessments that we were talking about earlier, like your ability to interact with others. Work assessments, like your ability to stay on task, test scores, things of that nature. You can also get functional assessments from teachers, from doctors. Those are very helpful because it's talking about those specific functional issues, whether that be learning, remembering, things of that nature. They're talking about the specific ones. So those are the most helpful. We don't all the time get functional assessments, but when we do, I do my happy dance. Tips for reconsideration. Know where to appeal. Appeal to your local Social Security office. Keep the Bureau, again, you're going to hear these steps. These steps are generally the same steps throughout the different processes. We're trying to emphasize reconsideration here because this is a new step, and we want to make sure that people know what they're supposed to do in this new step. Look for mail from the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry about your case, and seek help to fill out your reconsideration form. Please do if you can. Again, generally the same steps with regard to tips for hearing. One that I'll emphasize is it's very important to attend hearings. Please attend hearings. Just being there actually, and the way that you're interacting, the judges may be able to pick up on some things non-verbally, so please attend hearings. You can also bring witnesses to these hearings that could attest to your daily functional limitations, so whether that be a mother or a parent or whomever. And also, I like to say that with regard to submitting records, even if you don't necessarily have an advocate who are submitting or who's advocating on your behalf at these particular hearings, you have to turn in all of your records 5 business days before the hearing. And just securing records, I don't know the people who do these appeals, just securing records alone, it's just a very complex and time-consuming thing, so if you can get an advocate, please get an advocate. And Claire's going to talk about the common SSI questions.
Yeah, do you have a question?
So I have a student who received benefits prior to turning 18. His entire life, he has a diagnosed disability, he has an IEP, he's linked with OVR. He turns 18, Social Security is like, nope. He has an IEP, he's continuing. So how do you navigate and help a parent who's like, his disability didn't go away? He, is continuing in school, like we have all these resources, but yet Social Security keeps saying, you're denied.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that process? Because I'm sure it's confusing and time consuming.
So the question is about an 18-year-old who was getting SSI benefits before they turned 18. They continue to have a disability. They continue to have an IEP. They are connected with OVR services. But the Social Security just continues to maintain that they are not disabled. And how do you navigate that process? So first, it happens so frequently. 75% of people get a letter that their benefits are going to stop at age 18. It is higher in Pennsylvania than most other states, and we've tried to figure out why, and we honestly don't really know. But the most important thing to do is to file an appeal, because that initial cutoff is so incredibly common, in part because the adult standard is more difficult to meet. And at age 18, a lot of people don't have a lot of evidence of having tried to work or of what it would be like for them to try working. It sounds like your student was better connected than some others I've seen. But if you file an appeal, it gives you a little bit more time to gather evidence. It gives you a little bit more time to get an advocate. And an in-person, face-to-face hearing is a much easier time to make your case than when Social Security is just mailing you letters and looking at documents. In terms of the work incentive that we've talked about, it sounds like that student never should have been taken out of pay status, meaning like they should have continued to get their benefits if they had an IEP. But I will warn you that work incentive, Section 301, that allows those benefits to continue throughout the IEP process is just like riddled with mistakes. There's a single office in Baltimore that handles all of those determinations. It is not a transparent process. It's really difficult. So my best recommendation is if the family is trying to get benefits through that Section 301 process based on the IEP, is just to hound the local Social Security office. It's so difficult. Like, who has time to keep calling them or showing up? But that really is the only way. They need to, the local Social Security office needs to have evidence that the student does have the IEP. They need OVR to fill out a specific form. So if you are coordinating with OVR, maybe you can help facilitate the completion of this single 2-page form, which is the only form they'll accept. So it is a heavier lift if you're trying to navigate that work incentive program. So persistence, making sure they have the necessary documentation, are really the best tips I have. And then just like a lot of empathy, because it is such a difficult process to go through. Yeah.
To kind of figure out the track off of that, our program, we worked with a client and she said her son was cut off of SSI because he worked over like 1,000 hours in a month, but he's 12.
So the question is, a 12-year-old was cut off because Social Security said they worked 1,000 hours a month. Was the 12-year-old working? Okay. The 12-year-old was not working. Social Security does mix up work histories from time to time, and you just have to contact them and say, you very clearly, it sounds ridiculous, but they don't look at like common sense, like, this doesn't quite make sense. So you just have to contact them and request that they correct the work history, and they will eventually, but it's, yeah, go ahead.
I have a different perspective on all this. I'm a transition coordinator.
Okay.
And so when I'm sitting in IEP meetings and I know a student family's receiving SSI benefits, and I'm encouraging them to work, that start employment, that start getting part-time employment, the parent's response to me is, no, because we don't want our SSI benefits to go away.
Yeah.
So can you please give some advice to the
Yeah, so the question is, as a transition coordinator, you're obviously trying to get students to work and to gain those skills while they're young, and it's still easier to pick up those skills. So the good news is Social Security has a lot of work incentives in place. So let's talk about those briefly. Because there is so much fear, there's so much misunderstanding about these rules. You can absolutely refer a family if you're noticing a lot of fear or misunderstanding to a work incentive coordinator. They're called WIPA programs, work incentive planning agencies. I don't actually know what the A stands for, but they're all around the state. So if you just look for your local WIPA and refer the family to that. Does anybody here work for a WIPA? Yay, cool. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Call a ticket to work number.
So call the ticket to work number is the best way to get in touch with the WIPA. And so like Key said, we work with a lot of young adults. So this is always part of our practice, is to say, don't forget, you can work. You are encouraged to work. Social Security has all kinds of rules in place, especially for young adults, to encourage work. Because $771 is not enough money it's not a lot of money to live on. And so even if you are getting benefits, it's always going to be better for you to work. So the most basic rule is they ignore the first $20 of any kind of income you have, and then they ignore the first $65 of earned income, of money you get from work, and then they only count half of the money you earn after that. So that's sort of a weird formula. So let's go through an example. I will just give you the summary here. You can read through it if you want. So say we have Sonia. Sonia is getting SSI benefits, and she decides to work. Her employer pays her $885 a month, which happens to be a very easy amount to apply this formula to. So Social Security ignores $20, and then they ignore $65 because it's earned income. So they're only even looking at $800 of those $885. And then they only count half of that towards Sonia. So they're only, in their eyes, they're only looking at $400 that they need to reduce her benefits by. So you subtract $400 from $771, and you get $371. That means her SSI benefits are going to go down. SSI benefits are reduced when the individual has income. But when you add that $371 to her earnings, she comes out with a total of $1,256 at the end of the month. That's more than she would have been getting if she was just getting SSI. It's more than she would have been getting if she was just working. So it is always going to be better financially at the end of the month to get money, to work. And some people are like, well, I heard I can only work 20 hours a month. Not true. Not true. There's no hour cap. What happens is, like Keith said, Social Security is periodically reviewing cases to see if the person's condition has improved, to see if they're still disabled. This happens whether or not you are working. If the individual has a full-time job, they're earning thousands and thousands of dollars, that might trigger Social Security to move a review up more quickly, but it's going to happen anyways, and if you can work full-time, this probably isn't the right program for you anyways. But they do look at whether or not that's something you can sustain. So even if you're working and you're earning $3,000 a month, there's still going to be a review of your case. They're still going to look at your medical evidence. They're going to see how your condition has changed, if you're going to be able to sustain this level of work, or if this was just a 2-month fluke. So we have clients who have chronic conditions that get better and worse over time. They're looking at that longitudinal perspective. So we try to reduce the fear wherever we can and encourage people to work, but the information is really important. And then there's another incentive that I want to tell you about that is really good for young adults. It's a student earned income exclusion. And how we were just talking about, they ignore the first $85. For students, they ignore even more money. They ignore $1,870 every month, which means that if you're a student, you can earn up to that amount every month, and it will have zero effect on your benefits, up to $7,550 a year. This is also an amount that changes every year. So this is the 2019 amount. Unlike the resource limit, they do increase this to allow for higher earnings. And you do have to be under 22, and you do have to meet these hour requirements for the number of hours you're in high school, in college, or in a training course. But as long as you give Social Security proof that you're a student, you can earn so much without it having any reduction in your benefits. There are all kinds of, yeah, go ahead, question. Yeah, are the figures pre-tax? They are. No, so this is pre-tax. So this is what they're earning before taxes. And so there are a whole lot of other work incentives that are in place. There is a plan to achieve self-support, where you identify an employment goal and then you're allowed to save money that's excluded. There are lots of other ways. If the young person you're working with is interested in working, I encourage you to have them go see a counselor, because you can come up with a plan to make it work for you as an individual based on your employment goals. Does that answer your transition question? Okay, great. So if someone does decide to work, it's very important that they report income. They have to report it within the first week of the month after they earn money. So whatever you earn in July, you're supposed to report within the first week of August. You can call a number. There's an app that none of my clients have ever tried using, so I have no idea if it actually works. You can drop off or mail pay stubs to Social Security. If you do call the phone number, they are going to ask for periodic documentation, so you will eventually have to provide them with your pay stubs just so they can confirm what you're reporting. And then they adjust your benefits accordingly. If you don't report, they will find out about it. And then they will charge you an overpayment because they should have been reducing your benefits based on your income before. So just to avoid any overpayments, any stress, just report it. And remember that as your earnings go up, you still have to comply with this same $2,000 resource limit. So that can get harder as your earnings increase, but that does not change unless you look at one of the alternatives that we've mentioned here. Okay, so that's our pitch to encourage folks to work and to alleviate some of the fear. The next very common issue that we see for SSI recipients is that their benefits are being reduced and they're unsure why, or they don't know how to change it. And there are a lot of reasons that benefits can be reduced. It can be because they have earned or unearned income. And just so you know, if Social Security is reducing your benefits, they have to send a letter saying that they're reducing it and why they're reducing it, and that is appealable. So if you disagree with them reducing your benefits, you can file an appeal. And again, that's within, so when we say 65 days, it's 65 days from the date on the notice, because it's a 60-day appeal deadline, but they allow 5 days for mailing, like he said. But that's just like a little bit easier for people to measure sometimes. The main takeaway here that I try to encourage people is if you're getting anything less than the full amount, make sure you know why. Make sure that you know it's correct, because you don't want to be losing money and just accepting it month after month without any idea why that's happening. Like, we have a lot of children or young adults who were getting cash assistance from the welfare office, and that reduction is carried over even when their cash assistance from the welfare office stops. So just a few of the most common situations that we see. The first is when SSI benefits are reduced by 1/3. This is incredibly common for young adults because it means that they are living with someone and not paying for their living expenses. So if you have that IEP in school, your benefits continue, you're living with your parents and you're not contributing to the household expenses, your benefits will be reduced to $514. The reason for that is Social Security counts I guess they count it as what they call in-kind support and maintenance, but they're saying your parents are basically giving money for you to live on because you don't have to pay for living expenses. And they reduce the benefits accordingly. So this includes if someone else is paying for the rent or mortgage, the utilities, and the food. Generally, benefits are also reduced if the person does not live with their parents or the family member or friend or whoever, but that person is giving them money to pay for a separate apartment. So if you want your 19-year-olds to rent an apartment and they can't afford the rent and you're paying $500 a month for that rent, that $500 counts as income because it's paying for shelter. So the way to fix that is to choose something else to pay for, to have that person pay for their shelter, and then you can pay for their cell phone bill, you can pay for their car bill, you can buy them clothes and give them the clothes. There are other ways to support SSI recipients that won't have the same negative impact on their eligibility, on their benefit amount. And the way to fix the 1/3 reduction, there are a couple of different things to look at. The main way to fix it is to pay your fair share of living expenses. So if there is a 3-person household, the mortgage is $900 a month, and it's 2 parents and an SSI recipient, since it's 3 people, $900 a month, they have to pay $300 of the mortgage for it to be their fair share. They also have to pay for part of the utilities and the food. If the mortgage is $3,000, the SSI recipient can't really pay 1/3 of that. So it's probably better just to accept the 1/3 reduction. But you do have the option, or if it's financially viable, that person can pay their fair share of living expenses, and then that 1/3 reduction will be corrected as long as you tell Social Security about the change. Go ahead.
What you're spending, you have to, is there an itemized list? Can a parent charge their child rent?
Yeah, the question is, do you have to submit documentation of what you're spending it on? And you do. They ask for documentation of what the expenses are. So if it's a mortgage, they want to see how much the mortgage is. They want to see what a typical utility bill is each month. The parent can charge rent. It needs to be market rate. So Social Security has a form that they ask the parent. They're not looking for you to do like an analysis of the rents in the neighborhood. They're just looking for the parent to fill out a form that says, I would charge the same amount of rent to anybody else who wasn't my family member. If I was just renting this out, I would charge $400, and so that's what I'm going to charge my child. I'm not giving them a break in rent, essentially, just because they're my family member. Go ahead. Does that include kids in high school who are 18 to 21? Yes, it does. Even though the rest of the world has sort of caught up on this like transition age, Social Security has not. You are an adult at 18. You are separate from your parents at 18. And if you're living them and not paying your fair share of living expenses, then you get this reduction. So we've talked a little bit about overpayments. We want to quickly review what those are and how you can address them because they are incredibly common. It's one of the largest requests for our services we get that we just frankly can't meet because they are so common. And overpayments are caused when Social Security pays someone benefits that they later realize they should not have paid them. And then they send a letter in the mail, which is often terrifying to receive, saying, "You owe us thousands of dollars. Please pay us, thank you." And these are very common after appeals, like he mentioned. There's this amazing opportunity where if you're getting benefits, you get a cutoff letter saying your benefits are gonna stop. That's the income you're relying on to live. And you know it's gonna take you 2 years to get a hearing. You probably want to ask for those benefits to continue until you have a hearing. But then if you lose at your hearing, Social Security says, "Oh, well, you weren't eligible for these 2 years. This judge just affirmed the initial decision that you're not eligible, so now you owe us $15,000. So if you're in that position, there are a few, so the continuing benefits is one way. Like I said, it can also be caused if you're working and not reporting income to Social Security, or if you have other income that you're not reporting, and those overpayments tend to be smaller. There are a few options. Option number 1, you can file a request for reconsideration, which is an appeal. There's a deadline for that. As soon as they send you the letter saying we've overpaid you, the same appeal deadline we've been talking about this whole time basically applies. You have to apply within 65 days of the date on the notice. Then they review their calculations, see if they made any mistakes. You can also file a request to waive the overpayment, which means you're asking Social Security to say, "Oh, we'll just cancel this out. You don't have to pay it back. We're going to waive it." You can file a waiver at any time. There is no deadline. So if you miss the overpayment notice, if you think you owe it, but then later you realize you probably don't, you can file a waiver. You can also do both of these things at the same time if you want to. Very important, Social Security is not allowed to collect money from you after you have filed one of these. So if they continue to send you letters or if they otherwise try to collect the money from you, it just means they've made a mistake in their system. They haven't noted properly that you have this pending, and you can ask them to fix that. So just some very basics, so you know how to find it. There's a form you have to fill out for a waiver. Again, save a copy because they might lose it. Submit it to the local office. They have to stop trying to collect the overpayment. If they deny your waiver, that is also a decision that you can appeal, and you can eventually get to a hearing. You can also, even if you don't get your waiver approved or you feel like you can afford to pay it back or you should pay it back, but they're charging you too much money every month, you can also ask for a lower payment amount. The maximum that they're supposed to collect for SSI recipients is 1/10 of the benefit amount. So this year, that's about $77. So if you feel like $77 is too much every month, then you can ask for 40 is a pretty common amount. Even as low as 10, they're willing to accept. And there's a separate form you can fill out to come up with that payment agreement. And as long as you're in a payment agreement, you're not considered to have like a delinquent debt with Social Security. Because if you have a debt that you're not paying off with them, you don't have a payment agreement, you don't have a waiver, you don't have an appeal, they can try to collect the overpayment in other ways. Just had a client who lost her entire tax return because they can collect that to pay back the overpayment. So that's not great. If you can have a payment plan, that is a much better alternative. Go ahead. Absolutely. We see waivers get approved all the time. We consistently file them when we lose our young adult appeals. And the standard for young adults who have gotten benefit continuation is just that they acted in good faith, which means they thought they were still disabled. They didn't file a frivolous appeal, and they can't afford to pay it back. So you have to show like, okay, I didn't miss my hearing, I showed up, I responded to your letters, and I don't have any income right now, so I can't afford to pay this back. And I very frequently will get waivers granted for that population. Go ahead.
I work with an individual who says Social Security claim they overpaid for whatever reason, and they are taking one third of his check. I mean, it went down considerably. Even though they're still collecting their repayment or overpayment, would it be too late to apply or complete the
So the question is, she's working with an individual who Social Security is charging an overpayment. They're getting a 1/3 reduction in their benefits. Is it too late to file these forms? First of all, if it's a 1/3 reduction, I almost guarantee you it's not an overpayment. It's probably a reduction because of their living situation. So I would clarify with Social Security what's causing the reduction, because they can't take 1/3 of an SSI check to pay an overpayment. So first clarify what's causing it. If it's 1/3, almost guarantee you it's because they don't think that they're paying their fair share of living expenses. So that individual would either need to provide documentation that they're paying for their living expenses, or just accept that they aren't paying for their living expenses, so the 1/3 reduction is going to continue. Sometimes there's both that and an overpayment, and there's no deadline. So they can submit this waiver, which is Form 632. You can also just Google Social Security waiver. You don't have to remember these numbers. I just put them there for ease of finding the forms if you want that. Or the separate form, which is, they just updated these forms in April of this year. There didn't used to be 2 separate forms, so just make sure that you know you're using the updated ones. They can fill out this to change the payment amount.
Okay, so I guess to rephrase my question, no matter what the circumstances are for the overpayment and the repayment, by filing this waiver and these forms, the payment amount can be reduced.
So what the question is, whatever the circumstances are, if you file this waiver or this reduction in payment amount, the repayment amount can be reduced only if it's an overpayment. This is only available for overpayments. If the benefit amount is being reduced because of living expenses, or if the benefit amount is being reduced because the person has income, you can't change that reduction because the amount of the reduction is calculated based on the amount of income. But if it's for an overpayment, you can file either of those forms at any time. Go ahead. Sure.
So my son turned 18,
Mhm.
filing for the SSI benefits. So when you're saying that they have to contribute 1/3, they don't have income, so you can't contribute 1/3
Yeah.
until he actually gets to them.
Yes, so the question is, if you're filing an application and the requirement is that they contribute 1/3, but they don't have any income yet, they obviously can't be contributing 1/3. And I hope I didn't misspeak. I want to make sure it's clear. They don't have to contribute 1/3, they have to contribute their fair share. So if there's 3 people in the household, their fair share would be 1/3. If there's 5 people in the household, their fair share would be 1/5. And it's a 1/3 reduction, so I said 1/3 a lot. The way that you can address that, if the person doesn't have income yet, there are a couple of options. The first option is to just accept, while we file their application, they were getting this reduction in benefits, but as soon as the benefits start, I'm going to update Social Security. The second he has income, we're going to show, okay, look, now he's paying this amount in rent, he's paying this amount for utilities, he's paying this amount for food, so adjust his benefits. You can almost always adjust benefits if there's been a change, and you provide evidence of those changes to Social Security. The second option, which is a little bit trickier, is to say we had a loan agreement. We made an agreement that he would repay me for my living expenses as soon as he was able to. Well, really, he was just going to repay me for that. There can't really be conditions that the person's getting approved for benefits. But we agreed that someday he's going to repay me for these months that I've been covering his living expenses for him. And then Social Security will count that as a loan that you've given rather than as income that you provided to the person. So it kind of depends on what arrangement you've come to with your child, if there is an assumption that they're going to pay you back for this period of time, or if you just want to say, no, we're covering you for now. You're going to have a slight reduction in your back benefits, but as soon as your benefits start, we are going to update that information with Social Security so that going forward, you get the $771, you pay us $300 for rent, and we're good to go from there. So the question is, would that be the form I'm talking about? No, so there's not a specific form for this, unfortunately. There are like a couple of different forms that Social Security might ask you to fill out, but what they're looking for in general is documentation that they're paying for their fair share of living expenses. So that would be like bring the mortgage or bring the lease, bring the utility bills, and then there's a meeting that you have with Social Security after someone gets approved for benefits. They bring you into the office, they say, show us information about your income, or you can do this at any time. You can just drop it off at the office. And you say, look, here's how much we pay in rent, here's how much they're planning to pay in rent. And then they have forms that they might ask you to fill out, but because there's two separate processes, this gets really complicated, sorry, they will give you the forms that they need, is the quick answer. And it will either be a form saying, I'm charging this person market value rate rent, or you will show them evidence of all of the expenses and explain that they're paying their fair share. But the forms that we talked about that I listed here were for overpayments, not for the living expenses. Yeah, go ahead. So there's someone with an appeal pending. They're about to have a hearing. They are working with OVR. They have a job coach. They might be able to start work. Will that affect their appeal at all? So there are a couple ways it could affect the appeal. If their income, way back when we looked at the application stage, if their income goes above $1,220 a month, they do count that at the application stage as precluded, as they can't be eligible. If their income is lower than that amount at the application stage, they could continue to be eligible. And for example, I just won a case for a client who was working with OVR, and in the workplace assessment it said she could work, but she needs a job coach for 90 to 120 days before she can do that job. And we won her appeal because that's a workplace accommodation. So the judge decided, yeah, she could probably work, but she needs this accommodation, and that's not what Social Security considers competitive employment, because you need this accommodation. So it's a very case-by-case determination, but just working does not mean that the person is found ineligible, even at the application stage. You have to look at how they're able to do that work. What kind of help are they getting? How many hours are they working? How much are they earning? There are a whole lot of case-specific factors that come into play. Yeah. So they decided that she wasn't disabled enough and she could do some type of job. That's exactly what they say. That it doesn't matter if it's not your dream job. It doesn't matter if it's not the job that you actually want to be working towards. The question is whether you can do any job at all in the national economy. So it's a very different standard. We're almost done. So the last thing I just want to mention before we get onto some resources is if anybody works with anybody who's in foster care, one of the advocacy initiatives we took on was to increase access to benefits for youth in foster care, because foster care payments count as income sometimes in a way that makes a lot of youth ineligible. So if you do work with anyone in foster care, please know that they can apply for benefits 6 months before they prepare to leave care for any reason, whether it's aging out, reunification, adoption, anything. And they will not be denied on the basis of income because of those foster care payments. We have a toolkit that we put together that's in the electronic resources for this session, along with the PowerPoint, a fact sheet about overpayments, and a fact sheet about applications, possibly. So I'd just like to make sure people know about that. If you are in Philadelphia, here is how to contact us. We, like I said, are able to represent some people in SSI appeals only. We're hoping to be able to expand that to applications in the fall. There is also a private lawyer referral service. And like I said, there are legal aid agencies all over Pennsylvania. We have a Pennsylvania Legal Aid Access Network. So I can give you their information if you need it, or you can just look at your local legal aid organization to see if they provide representation in appeals or if they can refer you to a private attorney. Private attorneys on appeals usually charge a contingency fee, which means that only if you win do they charge a portion of the back benefits. It's a quarter of your back benefits. There's a $6,000 cap, so compared to some other attorneys' fees, it's more manageable because it's not out-of-pocket upfront expenses. Here's our website. We have a whole lot of other resources like the video we showed you, other fact sheets translated into different languages as well. Here's Social Security's website. If you want to contact Social Security, you can call their 800 number as long as you are prepared to wait on hold for a very long time. Or you can use this locator to find your local office where you may also have the pleasure of waiting in line for a very long time. This is our contact information. We put it here because we want you to ask us questions. So we only can represent people in Philadelphia, but if you have general questions about the SSI process, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to be a resource. Are there any other questions that we didn't get to?
Your last statement made me think the rules for Social Security are clear across the state. They don't fluctuate from county to county. Right?
The question is, are the rules the same across the state? Do they fluctuate county to county? The rules are the same. How they are implemented depends on the individual you're in front of, but no, the rules are the same statewide. Go ahead. Getting an advocate, did I hear you right? Okay, so the question is, what do we mean by get an advocate? So we're attorneys, we represent people in appeal. We meant hire us by hire us, our services are free. But get a lawyer if you can, because Social Security requests records, they half-heartedly follow up on requests for records. You can't know that they get all the information unless you have an advocate or you submit it yourself. We also think it's a good idea to get an advocate because we sometimes help get additional evidence. Like we'll reach out to providers, we'll try to get functional assessments, represent you in the hearing so that you can make sure that the testimony, like he was saying, there's a lot of challenges with getting out this really difficult private information in a sort of public hearing. So we can help with things like that. And we just think that it's a very stressful process. So if you can find support, we highly recommend you reaching out to get an attorney. And when Social Security sends letters about notices, at least in Philadelphia, they send a list of attorneys that you can reach out to. I assume that's happening everywhere. I just can't personally confirm it, but you can look at the correspondence that they send you for that list of advocates in your area. Any other questions? We'll be here for a few minutes if you want to come up with any case-specific questions. Thank you all.